unpack the foundational text that, honestly, built modern economic theory from the ground up. We're talking about Adam Smith's monumental treatise, The Wealth of Nations. You know, if you ever want to understand why your paycheck buys what it does, or how our modern economies actually function at their absolute core, well, this is exactly where it all begins.
It's kind of the ultimate question, isn't it? Like, what actually determines if a nation is incredibly rich or just devastatingly poor? We're going to answer this today by exploring Adam Smith's completely revolutionary premise about the real mechanics of wealth. And to do that, we're going to look really closely at the specific framework Smith actually lays out right at the start before he even gets into the super granular details of his theories.
So here's our roadmap for the explainer. We've got the true source of wealth, the productivity paradox, labor and capital stock, industry versus agriculture, and finally, funding the Commonwealth. This agenda actually perfectly mirrors Adam Smith's own 5-book plan for how to build a nation's economy. Let's get into it. Section 1. The true source of wealth. Let's start things off by dispelling some pretty ancient myths about what actually makes a country rich. See, Smith argues that true wealth isn't just, gold sitting in a vault somewhere, or the sheer size of a nation's borders on a map. For him, the ultimate fund is the continuous engine of human labor, what he calls annual labor. You could almost think of it like a really early concept of GDP. It's that everyday grind, the work that supplies a society with all the necessities and conveniences it consumes year after year. Whether a country directly consumes the immediate produce of that labor, or they trade it for goods from other nations, human labor is literally the ultimate starting line. Okay, so what actually dictates how well a nation is supplied with all these conveniences? Well, Smith boils it down to just 2 core factors. Number 1, the skill, dexterity, and judgment with which that labor is applied. And number 2, the proportion of people who are actually employed in useful labor versus those who just aren't. And really, that's it. Regardless of a nation's climate, its weather, or its territory, those 2 levers alone pretty much dictate whether a society thrives or struggles. Moving on to Section 2, the productivity paradox. This brings us to a really fascinating historical observation Smith makes about how different societies actually function.
Now, here is a stark and, honestly, kind of illogical contrast. In ancient, less developed nations, pretty much everyone who is physically capable is employed in useful labor. It's universal labor. Yet they're frequently reduced to such miserable poverty that they sometimes even face starvation. But then, on the flip side, in what Smith terms civilized and thriving nations, a massive chunk of the population doesn't work at all. It's wild.
Just think about this dynamic for a second. You have a society where, say, 40% of the people might be completely idle, right? And some of those idle folks are consuming the product of 100 times more labor than the actual workers themselves. Yet, the society as a whole is so insanely productive that even the absolute lowest paid, most frugal worker still enjoys a vastly better standard of living than someone in a society where literally every single person works. So, what's the secret ingredient here? How on earth does a society with tons of non-workers produce so much more? Well, it comes down to that first factor we mentioned earlier, the skill, dexterity, and judgment with which labor is applied. Quality and organization completely obliterate sheer quantity. And this realization is so absolutely vital that Smith dedicates his entire first book just to this one concept, essentially proving that how we work matters far, far more than just how many of us are working. All right, Section 3, labor and capital stock. Let's see how all of this builds out into the broader economy. Now, while skill is definitely crucial, we obviously can't forget about the second factor, how many people are actually working. And Smith argues that this is entirely dictated by capital stock. You can think of capital stock as the raw fuel, the tools, the machinery, the overall investments of an economy. As he outlines in his second book, the amount of capital essentially dictates how many workers can be hired in the first place. Plus, the specific manner in which that capital is deployed determines exactly how much productive labor actually gets activated. Moving right along, Section 4, industry versus agriculture. Next, we're going to examine how nations actually manage all this labor and capital, which, spoiler alert, isn't always impartial. So, Smith notes in Book 3 that governments really love to tip the scales. Historically speaking, almost no nation has ever treated every industry equally. For example, ever since the fall of the Roman Empire, European policies have heavily favored the towns, and by that he means manufacturing, arts, and commerce, over the country, which represents agriculture. Because of these built-in biases, advanced nations ended up following some very different plans when it came to directing their labor. And as Book 4 explains, these biased policies didn't just stay on paper.
they caused this massive ripple effect. Driven initially by the private interests and, frankly, the prejudices of particular groups, they ended up spawning completely competing economic theories. You had some people championing the towns, while others were magnifying the farms. But the kicker is, these theories didn't just stay locked up in academia. They actively went out and influenced the real-world public conduct of princes and sovereign states.
Which brings us to Section 5, funding the Commonwealth. Finally, we reach the big overarching structure that oversees the whole shebang, the sovereign state.
Book 5 is basically all about how a government pays its bills. After looking at how the people generate wealth, Smith pivots to the state itself. He identifies the necessary expenses of a government, how society gets taxed to pay for them, and crucially, why modern governments take on debt in the first place. He takes a really hard look at the heavy, real-world impact that national debt and mortgaging future revenues actually has on the real wealth, meaning the land and labor, of a society. So, stepping back to look at the full plan of the work, you can really see how Smith masterfully connects these 5 distinct books into one cohesive blueprint. It's not just theory, it's this brilliant progression. It starts from the raw elements of human skill and labor, scales all the way up with capital stock, navigates through historical biases and economic theories, and finally culminates in the incredibly complex reality of sovereign debt and taxation.
I want you to think about this as you look at your own economy today. Literally everything we've covered in this explainer, the skill of the workforce, the deployment of capital, the tension between different industries, and the heavy weight of government debt, it was all laid out centuries ago. So are Adam Smith's foundational mechanics still regulating the conveniences of your modern life? Take a look around. You might just find that his blueprint is still very much the architecture of our world right now.